this was the position of the party opposite, think that we shouldn't be in a position where we're paying hundreds of pounds to the very richest pensioners. We have listened to concerns and raised the level of the threshold, but it is important to maintain that principle. If the position of the party opposite is now that they want to see a return to universal winter fuel payments, they need to have a word with the leader of the opposition, who has not supported universal winter fuel payments or indeed a universal state pension.
John Slinger.
I'm visiting the Job Centre in Rugby next week, and I'm looking forward to hearing more from them about their work with local businesses and also with people with disabilities and special educational needs to get people back into work. So could the Minister set out what further steps we're doing in that very important job of a Labour government?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his question, and I'm glad that he's visiting Rugby Job Centre, and I would encourage all members right across this House to go to their local job centres, because their work coaches have the most experience and knowledge about the things that we need to do to get people into work. We are creating Job Centre in your pocket so that everyone can have access to help 24 hours a day. And that letting technology take the strain will mean that our work coaches can do more of what they do best, which is giving people, person to person, the confidence to take up life's chances.
John Bland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, Policy Exchange published a very insightful report, Out of Control, looking at the pathways into benefit entitlements. They made the point that 50 years ago, just 1 in 2,500 people was said to have autism. Today, that has risen to 1 in 36 children. Will the ministerial team undertake to look at the implications of that definitional creep and the specific implications for benefit entitlements of her department?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have set up a panel of experts to advise us on how best to improve employment prospects for people with autism and with neurodivergence. I'd also say to him, we are, as he knows, going to be undertaking a review of the PIP assessment, so that co-producing it with disabled people, so that we have a clear way forward for who should and should not be entitled to personal independence payment.
Peter Swallow.
My honourable friend set out how this government is reforming pensions long term to help people in Bracknell Forest and across the country to save for their futures.
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question, and it's a crucial question. That's exactly why we have revived the landmark Pension Commission. We've got to confront the reality that currently we are on track for tomorrow's pensioners to be poorer than today's. Auto-enrolment has been a huge success, with 88% of eligible pensioners now saving, but 45% of working-age adults are currently saving nothing. 3 million self-employed, 1 in 4 low earners, and the Commission will ensure we build a pension system that is strong, fair and sustainable.
Listen, Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Carers Allowance Overpayments Review was due to report in early summer. It is now the 1st of September. In recent weeks, I've become aware of a case where the DWP has informed somebody that they now are owed, they now owe the DWP £18,000. That is a scandal. When is the review going to report back?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have received the report from Liz Sace, and I want to thank her very much for her review of earnings-related overpayments of carers allowance. We are currently considering the findings. We are, as she knows, making a number of changes. We've increased the earnings threshold for carers allowance in a way that will help, I think, avoid these problems in the future. We're looking at the possibility of a taper on carers allowance, but we'll come forward before very long at all, both with the report and with the government's response to it.
Joanna Baxter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As someone who proudly served the trade union movement for 2 decades before entering this place, I warmly welcome this government's improvement to workers' rights. Can I ask the Minister to set out what steps are being taken to ensure that no one is left behind in the vital reforms to statutory sick pay?
Yeah. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I know that so many of my honourable friends, including the honourable lady, will welcome the changes that we're making to statutory sick pay, improving eligibility for 1.3 million of the lowest paid employees, removing the waiting period, and many of those who will benefit are low-paid women. We know that the removal of the waiting period will mean all employees receive at least £60 more at the start of their sickness absence compared to the current system, but we will continue to evaluate these measures as they are implemented.
Kirsty Black.
It's the only part of these islands where child poverty is falling as a result of the Scottish Child Payment and as a result of the mitigation of the bedroom cap. When will the Labour government move from empty words to actual action to take children out of poverty?
Here. Secretary of State.
We are already extending free school meals to all families on universal credit. We have extended the holiday activities and food programme, so we feed poor kids not just during school but in the holidays too. We have introduced a new fair repayment rate in universal credit. We have done the first ever multi-year settlement on the Crisis and Resilience Fund to help struggling families. We're introducing rolling out breakfast clubs. Our child poverty strategy will be published in the autumn. We're already taking action to tackle poverty. We will do more, and I would say to the Honourable Lady, the Scottish Government needs to look at how it's spending the biggest ever funding settlement given in the spending review, including on employment support, because helping parents into good quality jobs is the long-term key to tackling poverty and inequality.
Chair of the Select Committee, Debbie Abrahams.
Mr. Speaker. I was delighted to see the establishment of the Disability Advisory Panel a week or so ago. So sorry, Mr. Speaker, I've got a cold. Can the Right Honourable Gentleman let us know how will this advisory panel link with the co-production in the Timms Review?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and we've announced that Zara Todd will be the chair of the Department's Disability Advisory Panel. The panel was announced in the Get Britain Working White Paper last year. We are separately going to be setting up a group to work with me on the review of the PIP assessment. Of course, I'll be talking to the Disability Advisory Panel about those arrangements, but they will be separate structures.
Final questions to Julie Lewis.
Despite his new role in riding to the rescue of the Treasury, is the Pensions Minister still available to fulfil in principle the undertaking he gave me before the recess to have a meeting about the plight of ExxonMobil pensioners and the difficulties in them getting the discretionary surplus benefits to which I think they should be entitled?
Absolutely.
Minister. Right. Before we come to the statement by the Home Secretary, I should like to say something about the House of Justice resolution. The case of Epping Forest District Council versus Simona Hotels is still active and before the court. However, because this case concerns wider issues relating to the planning consent required for hotels to house asylum seekers, I've decided to grant a waiver so that members are free to refer to it in proceedings. However, I would remind the House that there are other active criminal prosecutions relating to disorder around the Bell Hotel and elsewhere, as well as one prosecution of an asylum seeker for alleged sexual offences. Honourable members may refer to the general issues relating to asylum accommodation, but should avoid discussing any specific criminal cases. I now call the Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will update the House on actions that we are taking with France to strengthen our border security and the next steps on our reforms to the asylum system. The House will be aware that when we came into the government, we found an asylum and immigration system in chaos. Small boat gangs for 7 years had been allowed to embed their criminal trade along the French coast. The asylum backlog was soaring and illegal working was being ignored. The previous government had lost control of the system and, as a result, opened many hundreds of asylum hotels across the country, while returns were a third lower than in 2010. And before leaving office, They deliberately cut asylum decision-making by 70%, leaving a steeply rising backlog behind. It is little wonder that people right across the country lost confidence in the system and demanded to know why they were paying the price of a system that was so out of control. But that does not mean that people rejected the long and proud history of Britain doing our bit to help those fleeing persecution or conflict, including in the past decade families from Ukraine, Syria and Hong Kong. Because it is the British way to do our bit alongside other countries to help those who need sanctuary. But the system has to be controlled and managed, based on fair and properly enforced rules, not chaos and exploitation driven by criminal smuggler gangs. And it is exactly because of our important tradition that substantial reforms are needed now. In our first year in government, we've taken immediate action, laying the foundations for more fundamental reform. We have restored asylum decision-making and then rapidly increased the rate of decisions. Had we continued with the previous government's freeze on asylum decisions, thousands more people would have been in hotels and asylum accommodation by now. Instead, we removed 35,000 people with no right to be here, including a 28% increase in returns of failed asylum seekers and a 14% increase in removals of foreign criminals. We've increased raids and arrests on illegal working by 50%, and we cut the annual hotel bill by almost £1 billion in the last financial year. We are rolling out digital ID and biometric kits so immigration enforcement can check on the spot whether someone has a right to work or a right to be in the UK. And on channel crossings and organised immigration crime, we are putting in place new powers, new structures and new international agreements to help dismantle the criminal industry behind the boats. So I want to update the House on the further steps we're now taking. In August, I signed the new treaty with France, allowing us for the first time to directly return those who arrive on small boats. The first detentions took place the next day of people immediately on arrival in Dover, and we expect the first returns to begin later this month. Applications have also been opened for the reciprocal legal route, with the first cases under consideration, subject to strict security checks. We've made clear this is a pilot scheme, but the more we prove the concept at the outset, the better we will be able to develop and grow it. But the principles it embodies are crucial, because no one should be making these dangerous or illegal journeys on small boats, and if they do, we want to see them swiftly returned. But in return, we believe in doing our bit alongside other countries to help those who have fled persecution through managed and controlled legal programmes. This summer, we've also taken further action to strengthen enforcement against smuggling gangs. France has reviewed its maritime approach to allow for the interception of taxi boats in French waters, and we will continue to work with them to implement this change as soon as possible. In the last year, the National Crime Agency has led 347 disruptions of immigration crime networks, their highest level on record, and a 40% increase in a year. Over the summer, we announced a £100 million uplift in funding for border security and up to 300 more personnel in the National Crime Agency focusing on targeting the smuggler gangs. And the border security bill will give them stronger powers, counter-terrorism powers against smuggler gangs, powers to seize and download mobile phones of small boat arrivals, and the power to ban sex offenders from the asylum system altogether. Mr. Speaker, if opposition parties work with us to speed passage through the other place instead of opposing the bill, those powers could be in place within months, making our country safer and more secure. Let me turn now to the major reforms that are needed to fix the broken asylum system that we inherited. Although we have increased decision-making and increased returns, the overall system remains sclerotic, outdated and unfair. So as we committed in the Immigration White Paper, we will shortly set out more radical reforms to modernise the asylum system and to boost our border security, tackling the pull factors, strengthening enforcement, making sure people are treated fairly, reforming the way that the ECHR is interpreted here at home, speeding up the system, cutting numbers and ending the use of hotels, and developing controlled and managed routes for genuine refugees. At the heart of these reforms will be a complete overhaul of the appeals system, the biggest obstacle to reducing the size of the asylum system and to ending hotel use. Because tens of thousands of people in asylum accommodation are currently waiting for appeals, and under the current system that figure is to grow, with an average wait time already of 54 weeks. So we have already funded thousands of additional sitting days this year, and the Border Security Bill will introduce a statutory timeframe of 24 weeks, but we need to go further. So we will introduce a new independent body to deal with immigration and asylum appeals, fully independent of government, staffed by professionally trained adjudicators with safeguards to ensure high standards, but able to surge capacity as needed to accelerate and prioritise cases, alongside new procedures to tackle repeat applications and unnecessary delays. We're also increasing detention and returns capacity, including a 1,000-bed expansion at Campsfield and Haslar, with the first tranche of additional beds coming online within months to support many thousands more in forced removals each year. And our reforms will also address the overly complex system for family migration, including changes to the way that Article 8 of the ECHR is interpreted. We should be clear, international law is important. It is because other countries know that we abide by it that we have been able to make these new agreements with France to return people who arrive on small boats, to make new agreements with Germany to stop the warehousing of small boats by criminal gangs, and to explore returns hubs partnerships with other European countries. But we also need the interpretation of international law to keep up with the realities and challenges of today's world. But there is one area where we also need to make more immediate challenges. The current rules for family reunion for refugees were designed many years ago to help families separated by war, conflict and persecution. But the way they are now being used has changed. Even just before the pandemic, refugees who applied to bring family to the UK did so on average more than 1 or 2 years after they had been granted protection, long enough for them to be able to get jobs or find housing or be able to provide their family with some support. In Denmark and Switzerland, currently those granted humanitarian protection are not able to apply to bring family for at least 2 years after protection has been granted. But here in the UK now, however, those applications come in on average in around a month after protection has been granted, often even before a newly granted refugee has left asylum accommodation. As a consequence, refugee families who arrive are far more likely to be seeking homelessness assistance. And some councils are finding that more than a quarter of their family homelessness applications are linked to refugee family reunion. That is not sustainable. Currently, there are also no conditions on family reunion for refugee sponsors, unlike those in place if the sponsor is a British citizen or a long-term UK resident, and that is not fair. Finally, the proportion of migrants who have arrived on small boats and who then apply to bring family has also increased sharply in recent years, with signs that smuggler gangs are now able to use the promise of family reunion to promote dangerous journeys to the UK. Mr. Speaker, we continue to believe that families staying together is important, and it's why we will seek to prioritise family groups among the applicants to come to Britain under our new deal with France. But reforms are needed. So in our asylum policy statement later this year, we will set out a new system for family migration, including looking at contribution requirements, longer periods before newly granted refugees can apply, and dedicated controlled arrangements for unaccompanied children and for those fleeing persecution who have family in the UK. And we aim to have some of those changes in place for the spring. But in the meantime, we do need to address the immediate pressures on local authorities and the risks from criminal gangs using family reunion as a pull factor to encourage more people onto dangerous boats. Therefore, we are bringing forward new immigration rules this week to temporarily suspend new applications under the existing dedicated refugee family reunion route. Until the new framework is introduced, refugees will be covered by the same family migration rules and conditions as everyone else. Mr. Speaker, let me turn next to the action we're taking to ensure that every asylum hotel will be closed for good under this government. Not just by shifting individuals from hotels to other sites, but by driving down the numbers in supported accommodation overall. And not in a chaotic way through piecemeal court judgments, but through a controlled, managed and orderly programme, driving down inflow into the asylum system, clearing the appeals backlog, which is crucial, and continuing to increase returns. Within the asylum estate, we are reconfiguring sites, increasing room sharing, tightening the test for accommodation and working at pace to identify alternative, cheaper and more appropriate accommodation with other government departments and with local authorities. And we're increasing standards and security and joint public safety cooperation between the police, accommodation providers and the Home Office to ensure that laws and rules are enforced. Mr. Speaker, I understand and agree with local councils and communities who want the asylum hotels in their communities closed, because we need to close all asylum hotels and we need to do so for good. But that must be done in a controlled and orderly manner and not through a return to the previous government's chaos that led to the opening of hotels in the first place. Finally, Mr. Speaker, let me update the House on the continued legal and controlled support that we will provide for those facing conflict and persecution. We will continue to do our bit to support Ukraine, extending the Ukraine Permission Extension Scheme by a further 24 months, with further details to be set out in due course. We're also taking immediate action to rescue children who have been seriously injured in the horrendous onslaught on civilians in Gaza so they can get the health treatment they need, and the Foreign Secretary will update the House shortly on the progress to get those children out. I can confirm that the Home Office has put in place systems to issue expedited visas with biometric checks conducted prior to arrival for children and their immediate accompanying family members, and we have done the same for all the Chevening scholars and are in the process of doing so now for the next group of students from Gaza who have been awarded fully funded scholarships and places at UK universities so they can start their studies in autumn this year. And later this year, we will set out plans to establish a permanent framework for refugee students to come study in the UK so we can help more talented young people fleeing war and persecution to find a better future, alongside capped and managed ways for refugees to work here in the UK. Mr. Speaker, this government is determined to fix every aspect of the broken system we inherited and to restore the confidence of the British people. Solving problems, not exploiting them. A serious and comprehensive plan, not fantasy claims based on sums that don't add up or gimmicks that failed in the past. What we will never do is seek to stir up chaos, division or hate, because that is not who we are as a country, and that is not what Britain stands for. A practical plan to strengthen our border security, to fix the asylum chaos and to rebuild confidence in an asylum and immigration system that serves our national interest, protects our national security and reflects our national values. Because when we wave the Union flag, when we wave the St George's flag, when we sing God Save the King and celebrate everything that is great about Britain and about our country, we do so with pride because of the values that our flags, our King and our country represent. Togetherness, fairness and decency, respect for each other, respect for the rule of law. That is what our country stands for. That is the British way to fix the problems we face, and I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Home Secretary Criswell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of her statement. The government has now been in office for well over a year. And I think, I think it's fair to say not even their kindest friends would say they think it has gone very well. But listening to her statement, it sounds like she thinks everything is fine, and if there are any problems, it's all somehow somebody else's fault. Is she living in a parallel universe? After over a year in office, she must now take responsibility for what is happening under this government. Now, it's very interesting during her statement, Mr. Speaker, to notice she did not mention her favourite phrase from a year or so ago, that she was going to smash the gangs. I wonder why she was so silent on her previously favourite catchphrase. Well, the answer is it's not going very well. Now, she mentions National Crime Agency disruptions. Let me gently point out that 84% of those National Crime Agency disruptions that she cited a few minutes ago are classified as not being high impact. And if you look at National Crime Agency arrests for organised immigration crime, they actually went down by 16% in the last financial year, hardly smashing the gangs. And in fact, the NCA's arrests for organised immigration crime in that financial year were only 26, a drop in the ocean compared to the tens of thousands crossing the Channel. Now, Mr. Speaker, it was also rather conspicuous that the Home Secretary did not mention at all, not even a word, about the numbers illegally crossing the English Channel. Now, I wonder why that was. I wonder why she forgot to say a single word about that. Well, the reason, I'm afraid, is pretty clear. Because far from smashing the gangs, so far this year, 29,000, to be precise, 29,003 illegal immigrants have crossed the English Channel. That is the worst year in history, and it is up by 38% compared to last year. That is not success, it is failure. Things are not getting any better, they are getting worse. This government is failing, and everyone can see it. That is why there are protests up and down the country, and where those protests are peaceful, I support them. That is why, this is a shocking figure, 75%, let this sink in, 75% of the public think the government is handling immigration and asylum badly. 75%. Now, let me turn to hotels. Now, in the 9 months before the last general election, 200 hotels were closed down, including the Bell Hotel in Epping. But since 200 hotels closed down, but since the election, the numbers in asylum hotels have actually gone up by 8%. Now, had that previous trend of closures continued, today there would be no asylum hotels open at all. But I asked the Home Secretary to confirm this. Will she confirm that she will not reduce hotel usage simply by shunting asylum seekers from hotels and into flats and HMOs, which are desperately needed by young people? Will she give the House that categoric assurance? Now, Mr. Speaker, last week, the Home Secretary's lawyers said that the rights of illegal immigrants are more important than the rights of local people in places like Epping. And when this was expressly put in those terms to the Education Secretary yesterday on the Trevor Phillips programme, in those words, she shamefully agreed. Those statements are a disgrace. Does the Home Secretary realise how angry that makes people feel? It speaks of a government not on the side of the people in this country. It means the government appears to care more about the rights of illegal immigrants than our own citizens. So will she apologise for what her lawyers and the Education Secretary said? And will she undertake that ministers and their lawyers will never say that again? Now, Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary talks about her returns deal with France. Now, it has been reported that it will only return about 50 people a week, amounting to 6% of arrivals. Does she accept that allowing 94% of illegal arrivals to stay will act as no deterrent at all? Does she accept that? And if she doesn't accept this figure of 50 a week, will she tell the House exactly how many immigrants crossing the Channel will in fact be returned under her deal? Now, she may recall that back in July, we were told by the government that the first returns would happen within weeks. That was back in July. will she confirm to the House that the number who have actually been returned so far is precisely 0? Now, she also said to the House a couple of minutes ago that there would be security checks on those people reciprocally taken from France into the UK. But will she confirm that her agreement with France expressly says the French government will not provide the UK government with any information at all, any personal data about those migrants? So if there are criminal convictions, if there are suspicions about extremism or terrorism, the French government will not provide information to us. And if that is true, as her agreement says, how can she possibly conduct security checks? Now, Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary talked about tweaks to family visa rules. Let me be clear about the opposition's position on this. If someone enters this country illegally, they should not be allowed to bring in any family members. In fact, everybody entering this country illegally should be immediately removed to their country of origin, if possible, and if not possible, to a safe third country such as Rwanda, a scheme which she cancelled just days before it was due to start. The public expects that approach. The public expects that approach, an approach which she cancelled because the numbers crossing the Channel so far this year have been the worst ever, the worst in history. And it's not just the numbers are high. Hundreds of migrants having crossed, living in those hotels, have been charged with criminal offences, including sexual assaults on girls as young as 8 years old and multiple rapes. This is not just a border security crisis, it is a public safety crisis as well, and people up and down this country are furious. That is why they are protesting, and that is why 75% of the public think this government is failing on asylum and immigration. Now, if this government were serious about fixing this problem, they would know that little tweaks here and there are not enough. Tweaks to Article 8 are not going to be enough. Tweaking the family reunion rules are not enough. Returning, maybe if we're lucky, 50 people a week to France is not going to be enough. Maybe intercepting a few boats, worthy though that is, it is not going to be enough. The only way these crossings will stop, the only way we're going to get control of our borders back, is if everybody crossing the Channel knows they will get returned. Now, we tabled a bill to do that in Parliament a few weeks ago. We had a plan to do that, the Rwanda bill. We need to go further by disapplying the Human Rights Act, not just tinkering with Article 8, disapplying the entire Human Rights Act from immigration matters. If the government was serious, that is what they will do. So I have one last question for the Home Secretary. If she really wants to control our borders, if she really wants to get down the record numbers that have been crossing on her watch, she would back our plan, she would disapply the Human Rights Act in its entirety from immigration matters, and she would ensure that every single person crossing the Channel was immediately removed.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do worry about the Shadow Home Secretary's amnesia. And the 14 years that his party was in government, in which they never managed to do any of the fantasy things that he claims. So coming back to the reality rather than the fantasy rhetoric that he said. He talked about the approach that his previous government was taking before the election. So it's worth reminding the House of what that approach was. Asylum decisions dropped by 70%. They effectively had a freeze on taking asylum decisions, and they were returning those asylum seekers nowhere. Not to France, not to the safe countries that people had passed through, not to Rwanda, despite running the scheme for more than 2 years. Only 4 volunteers went at a cost of £700 million. Their approach left us with a backlog that was soaring. And had we continued with that totally failed approach, not taking asylum decisions, not returning people anywhere, there would have been tens of thousands more people in asylum accommodation, in asylum hotels across the country right now. That is the kind of chaos that his policies were heading towards, and that is the kind of chaos that he is promising again now. The House will remember his personal record, obviously, where small boat arrivals went up tenfold on his watch when he was an immigration minister, and where the less than 1,000 asylum seekers were in hotels by the time he became immigration minister, more than 20,000 by the time that he left. And his new concern for local councils, well, he was the immigration minister who actually wrote to local authorities to tell them he was stopping the requirement for local authorities to agree to accommodation, saying, I have instead authorised providers to identify any suitable properties that they consider appropriate. So, Mr. Speaker, we agree with communities across the country that asylum hotels must all close. And I understand too why councils individually want to take action in their area. But I would say to the Shadow Home Secretary, a party that wants to be in government should have a proper plan for the whole country, not just promote a chaotic approach that ends up making it worse in lots of areas. But that actually is their record. The reason that we have asylum hotels in the first place is because they did no planning, they let Manston chaos get out of control, and both the Shadow Justice Minister, when he was an immigration minister, as well as the Shadow Home Secretary, rushed around the country opening hotels instead of taking a practical, steady approach that gets to the heart of the problem, that reduces the asylum system, that strengthens our border security, and